Hey everyone, in today's episode, I will discuss the best suburbs to buy in Sydney that are cheap in different council regions. So I think everyone owes me a drink for this because I don't think you'll find anyone else doing this anywhere. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's start the video just discussing the best performing regions of Sydney. Now, it's very obvious where these are. One, the Lower North Shore. Number two, the eastern suburbs. And number three, the inner west. Each of these areas, I will discuss two suburbs that are actually very underpriced for their regions. There are secondary locations as well, so good performing regions just with smaller segments. So that's the Northern Beaches, the Sutherland Shire, and the Bayside. Both of these regions, I'll give everyone one suburb to look at that is underpriced in comparison to other suburbs and that represents really good value. For Sydney alone, look, the minimum purchase price you really need don't get me wrong, it is definitely region dependent. But in saying that, look, the absolute minimum you can buy in Sydney, and I mean, look, when I say the minimum here, I mean minimum absolutely dilapidated house, needs at least $150,000 worth of work, and it's the absolute minimum you'll get for in a suburb. I think is 1.2 million. That's the absolute minimum you're going to find something in these areas for, to be honest. So just to dispel that myth, look, the factors driving growth in Sydney really are a couple of things. Number one, the demographics. So if there's wealthy people living in an area, generally property prices do pretty well. That's pretty consistent in Sydney. Business demand and international demand are huge things, especially in your key markets. So look, as I discussed at the start, your Lower North Shore, eastern suburbs, and inner western Sydney, these really drive these markets, your business and international demand, like really, especially near, the CBD and especially near the water especially. Your other two are your shortage of supply and excess demand from a wealthy demographic. So Sydney's landlocked in every direction. Tasman Sea to the east, Blue Mountains to the west, Ku-ring-gai Chase to the north, Royal National Park to the south. And a lot of these suburbs have good demand from quite wealthy people too. Lifestyle triangle is another thing. Your access to work, schools and lifestyle precincts play a major part too. And also school zones. When I talk about school zones, I'm mainly talking about exclusive private schools or really easy access to those private schools as well. So those are the main things you probably need to think about when buying in Sydney, and the main things that also have driven these suburbs very well. Just to dispel a few more myths, cheap doesn't necessarily mean good performing. So what do I mean by that? Look, what I mean is if something's cheap, it can't be high performing, because if it was high performing, it wouldn't be cheap. So I'm going into an exact example, and the developers and buyers agents who sell this absolute garbage are going to hate me sharing this, but I'm going to actually compare a suburb called Curl in the Northern Beaches, so it's the lower end of the Northern Beaches, and Schofields in Western Sydney. So it's a new estate kind of development area in Sydney. Well, to be honest, Schofields has been developed for about 10 to 15 years now. So it's not as new, but in my eyes, if it hasn't been there for at least 50 years, it's new in my opinion, because I need statistics that prove that it's not a risk for me buying there. So here's Curl and Schofields in the 1990s. So this is taken directly off Domain, which is publicly available to everyone. Just so you know that I'm not making this stuff up, and I'm not trying to, push a narrative of some area or something like that. Everyone can find this online. So you can see Curl had a price from between, I'd say 200,000 up towards 300,000 in the mid 90s. And Schofields, this is the mid to late 90s, had a price that was fairly similar as well in the 1990s. Today, Curl is, in most parts, $3 to $4.5 million. Schofields is around 1.2 to about 1.4 million in the most part. So unbelievable. If you had bought in Curl in the mid 90s, you would have made an extra minimum $1.5 million, in some cases maybe $2.5 million. So that again is off Domain. So if anyone wants to fact check me, it's publicly available. So don't buy in areas like that. Don't buy in your new estates. They are absolute garbage. And just don't buy there. It's as simple as that. Let's get straight into an area. So an area I really like in Sydney is the Lower North Shore. Now, Lower North Shore is one of the best performing markets in Sydney. It is known for being a very wealthy market. It is known for having low density. It is also known for having some of the most livable areas in all of Australia. If you look at domains or timeouts, most livable suburbs in Australia is absolutely dominated by the Lower North Shore consistently. And a suburb that I actually think is extremely underpriced, and laugh at me if you will, but this is Sydney prices and Lower North Shore prices we're talking here, is Neutral Bay. Now, Neutral Bay is only about 4 km from the CBD. It is right next to North Sydney and home to some fantastic harbour views and some fantastic low-density dwellings. Now, of course, there is dwellings that are along Military Road and other dwellings that are, your apartments, which isn't what I'm insinuating that you should buy. But especially your detached homes that have been there for a long time, they're very cheap in reality for where it is. They're very, 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 very cheap for where they are. So Neutral Bay in comparison to Mossman. Now, Mossman is only about 2 minutes away from it. Cremorne is another very small suburb, which is close to $4 million. Neutral Bay is 3.35, and which actually occupies arguably a better pocket of the Lower North Shore than Mossman. Now, I'm not talking about for city views of beaches or anything like that. I'm talking for fundamentals, proximity to schools, proximity to the CBD, affluent people living in detached homes. I'm talking about no stock, no developable stock either. All those sorts of things play a large part. So, look, Neutral Bay is it's around $2 million cheaper than Mossman. And you have dwellings in Neutral Bay that are actually very similar to Mossman that tend to sell for like $3.5 million, where in Mossman they'll sell for $5 million. So sometimes you see properties in Neutral Bay that are a detached house on, let's say, 300 metres squared. Now, for people living in Perth and other areas, 300 metres squared in Neutral Bay in a detached home is actually very good. It's basically like buying, think of in Spring Hill in Brisbane, for example. It's like buying in Spring Hill basically with, let's say, a 400 metre squared block. That'd be the equivalent of buying in Neutral Bay in a 300 metre square detached home. So you'll get that in Neutral Bay for $3.5 million, but in Mossman it'll be 5.5 or 6. So it's actually really cheap in comparison to Mossman, which is a neighbouring suburb. So really good suburb to consider in the Lower North Shore, Neutral Bay. Now, again, just make sure you have the money to buy there, because don't buy a unit or townhouse. You need to buy a detached house, which is probably around $3.5 million. So just consider that as well. Another suburb that's actually really cheap in the Lower North Shore is a suburb called Narembeen. Now, the best photo I could get was actually just me taking it from walking over a overpass of the Bradfield Highway there. So you'll see here, look, to give everyone an idea where Narembeen is, it's basically in between Northbridge and kind of Crow's Nest. That's where it is. But the reason Narembeen is really cheap is because most of Narembeen, believe it or not, is actually detached homes on fairly decent blocks. Now, what I'm talking about here is, I mean particularly towards Northbridge. So the Northbridge side of Narembeen is extremely cheap. Now, Northbridge is more than $5 million for those that don't know. Now, yes, it does front the water and Middle Harbour, which does bring the price of it up. But for somewhere that is, just over $3 million, it's really cheap. Now, if you look at even Willoughby, which is actually further away from the CBD than Narembeen, Willoughby is actually more expensive than Narembeen, which doesn't make sense because Narembeen should be more expensive than Willoughby. However, if you then look at East Willoughby, which is even more expensive, that's above $4.5 million from memory at the moment. Narembeen has pockets that are literally closer to the water than East Willoughby. So you can pick up places, and don't get me wrong, the best places in Narembeen aren't that medium price. They're probably towards 3.6, maybe 3.8, but you can get them towards literally Northbridge, on the boundary of Northbridge, that are cheaper than East Willoughby, which is about $4.5 million, which is a $700,000 discount in a better suburb. And these areas as well, they're actually really close to your kind of Camaray, your Northbridge precincts, quite close to Middle Harbour. You can walk down to Tunks. Look, really close to the highways, really close to all the main, should I say, job precincts there close to North Sydney, so it's actually a better suburb. So look, for people looking to buy in the lower North Shore, really consider Narrabeen. And in essence, if you consider both Neutral Bay and Narrabeen, so the two ends, in my opinion, are really, really good suburbs to consider buying in if you've got that, $3 to $4 million budget. So consider that. Let's go to the eastern suburbs. Now, look, the eastern suburbs is probably the hardest place to say where's a cheap suburb that you should buy because it's the most expensive place in all of Australia. Look, you got suburbs like Bellevue Hill now is above $10 million. Even depending on what source you want to look at, sometimes it's higher. So I think on both real estate and CoreLogic, you'll see that it's, I think, 10.4 million or something like that. Just incredible. But look, a suburb that is quite cheap in the eastern suburbs is a suburb called Waverley. Now, I haven't probably given the best, should I say, photo of Waverley, but it is a still beautiful coastline. So there's actually the Waverley Cemetery, which is heritage listed and been there for a lot of years, but it's a really well-known area of Waverley, right by the Eastern Coastal Walk there, Bondi to Bronte walk. Or should I say, it's actually the whole Bondi to Coogee walk if you really want to do that entire walk. But anyway, look, Waverley is really cheap because it's surrounded by very, very expensive suburbs. Now, look, Bronte is literally $5.5 million, which neighbours Waverley itself. And then you've also got another suburb called Queen's Park. Now, not a lot of people know the suburb of Queen's Park, but it's basically right near Centennial Park and Bondi Junction, just north of Centennial Park. So Queen's Park is actually fairly significantly more expensive than Waverley, but it's actually not as well located in my view, especially of the eastern suburbs, expensive suburbs, and also where the beaches are. Generally, the expensive eastern suburbs are close to the beach. That's how they work in most circumstances. But anyway, you can see here, Waverley is actually around $500,000 cheaper than Queen's Park, yet it neighbours Bronte and it also neighbours Bondi. So Waverley's really cheap, and it's also got a really good precinct near the Five Ways there at Waverley. It's got all these restaurants, sort of heritage listed pubs, and just a really good kind of lifestyle. Look, a lot of people who love cycling, running, triathletes, surfers, lifestyle people, wealthy immigrants and everything like that love Waverley because you've got really good buses to the CBD. It's close to Bondi Junction. All the things you need are nearby. Not saying Queen's Park isn't, but the only thing with Queen's Park is you're not really as close to the beach as you are in Waverley. So that's another thing that just adds to it. So definitely a suburb to consider, Waverley, if you have the money of about $3.5 to $4 million in the eastern suburbs. So sorry if it sounds, I know it doesn't sound cheap, but we're just talking eastern suburbs prices here. Another suburb in the eastern suburbs that you should consider buying in is Paddington. Now, not everyone's gonna think that this is the eastern suburbs, but I'm including in the eastern suburbs because if you say Woollahra is in the eastern suburbs, and it is in the Woollahra, obviously, council region, and everyone in the world would say, Rose Bay is in the eastern suburbs and Woollahra is in the eastern suburbs. In my opinion, that would count Paddington as well. So, look, Paddington, for people that don't know, was actually Sydney's first slum. So in the early 1900s, during the bubonic plague, Paddington had about 30% of the suburb that actually got the plague, and it was full of these tiny tin shacks where a lot of the, very poor residents used to work. A lot of the people that worked in the shipyards, a lot of the people that used to work in the bricks and mortar factories in Sydney used to live in Paddington, and just the general labourers used to live there too. So it actually used to be a very poor suburb, riddled with the plague in years gone by. But look, throughout the mid-1900s, so the mid-1950s to probably the 1970s, it really started to gentrify, and it is a really upscale, upmarket suburb now. Look, that's only seen in the median personal income in Paddington. Now, this is incredible. To give everyone an idea, the median household income in Australia is about $1,870. Paddington's personal income alone is $1,698, and their household income's $3,131. So it's literally nearly double the personal income is more than double, because the personal income in Australia is, I think, $805 a week. This is just out of Census 2021. And even if you compare that to Edgecliff, which is actually even close to the water and close and literally Double Bay's basically sister suburb, you can see you've actually got higher income even in Paddington than that. So pretty incredible suburb to buy in. Really cheap for the eastern suburbs again. Look, Paddington's around that sort of low to mid $3 million mark. So if you've got that budget, Paddington's something good to consider. Look, if you can find a detached dwelling in Paddington, just buy it. It's probably going to go for $4 million, but those are so rare it's not even funny. Most of Paddington's your detached dwellings. Your attached dwellings and terrace dwellings. Your detached dwellings are just worth an arm and a leg. So if you find that and you can afford it, just buy it. It's an incredible buy. Again, for someone that has an eastern suburbs budget. But anyway, for the eastern suburbs, consider both Paddington and Waverley. Really, really good suburbs to consider buying in. Leichhardt in Sydney's inner west is actually really cheap for where it is. Now, Leichhardt's got some great history to it. So it's obviously one of the first suburbs where the Italian migrants came, and it's got, some fantastic restaurants along Norton Street there. The Italian festival happens, once a year where they basically close down half the suburb. Popular. It's basically like a mosh pit. I go there sometimes. Got a lot of Italian friends. Have a lot of friends that used to play for Leichhardt Tigers at Lambert Park there. So really, really good suburb. You have a lot of, should I say, you just tiny little sort of miners cottages there, and you also have some larger dwellings. But look, this is just a heat map from CoreLogic's mapping the market, and you can see it's surrounded just by really expensive suburbs: Annandale, Lilyfield, and Haberfield. Haberfield's probably one a little bit unique because there's a lot of density restrictions there. It's mostly large dwellings on large backyards, so a little bit unique there, but especially compared to Lilyfield and Annandale, really similar dwellings. And a lot cheaper. So you can pick up places, in Leichhardt, literally still down to your $1.6 million mark. And my earlier thing saying the cheapest place you can find in Sydney is $1.2 million, I'm talking directly about Leichhardt. And the reason I'm saying that is because you can find, especially for an owner-occupier who isn't considering rental yield, sometimes dilapidated places for $1.2 million. They're tiny 2-bedroom homes in Leichhardt that, they'll probably need about $100,000 worth of work, but you can still pick it up for that at times. So definitely somewhere to consider when looking to buy in Sydney. So Leichhardt, really good place to buy if you've got a budget of, should I say, somewhere between $1.5 and $2 million. Really good suburb for the inner west of Sydney. Another suburb is Five Dock. Now, it might be a little bit controversial here, Five Dock, because it is still already quite expensive. It's about 2.6 to 2.7 million at the moment. It is a little bit further out than obviously Leichhardt that we spoke about. It's fairly close. It's still a bit further out. But the reason Five Dock is really cheap at the moment is, number one, it's actually surrounded by really expensive suburbs. So, Warimba's one, Abbotsford's another, Russell Lee's another. Those are your suburbs you're talking about. Cabarita's another. That's, they're all nearly $4 million. They're all above 3, closing in on $4 million. Five Dock, you're still picking it up for about, anywhere from about 2.6 to about 2.8 is reasonable in Five Dock. You have dwellings that are above 400 metres squared. For the inner west, that is actually quite a large dwelling, and a lot of them are brick veneer, exceptionally structurally sound dwellings, which is awesome. But look, the biggest thing in Five Dock that's going to absolutely change the suburb is this new inner west metro line that's going in. Now, look, there's not many suburbs in Sydney that really have a metro line in front of the harbour. There's not really any, to be honest. There's only really Milson's Point, and you could maybe argue Edgecliff that there is. And those are both like $3 and $4 million suburbs minimum. Actually, Edgecliff's even more if you find a detached house, which are present in Five Dock. So consider that. Milson's Point, there's barely any houses there. If you find a house, just buy it. It's probably $6 to $8 million. But anyway, this metro line, it is also going through a station called the Bays. But that's going to be basically near Whites Bay, which is technically Glebe, but it's not really the residential part of Glebe. It's more sort of close to Rozelle towards Anzac Bridge. That's kind of where it's going to be. So look, Glebe would be an arguable suburb as well, but not like Five Dock. This is going in the centre of Five Dock, literally, and it's only going to be literally like a 10-minute trip to the CBD or so. So you're going to get people that, really want to live near the water, near, obviously not a walking distance to Bay Run, right next to Hen and Chicken Bay as well. There's properties that front the harbour literally in 5 dock, and you're going to get them start to sell for, $4 and $5 million median prices a couple of years after this goes in. So, it's not necessarily, I'd say, a super cheap suburb at the moment, but it's one that is an absolute bargain for what's going to be there, because once this station's in there and you get the wealthy business owners and the wealthy migrants that continue to move in here, and also your wealthy developers, that suburb is going to absolutely explode. So, look, if you got, again, I hate to say this, but a $2.5 to $3 million budget and you want to live in the inner west, consider 5 dock, particularly towards that town centre if you have the money, because it is very cheap for what you're going to get today compared to what you're going to get in a couple of years' time. Look, Northern Beaches, I love the area. I go between it quite often. It's I think known in a lot of magazine surveys as the most livable area in Australia, or council region, should I say. Very expensive. Most suburbs are, $3 and $4 million that a lot of people would say are the true part of the Northern Beaches. So for people that don't know the Northern Beaches well, a lot of people say that if it's not on Pittwater Road or not on Barrenjoey Road, it's not a part of the Northern Beaches. So look, not that I necessarily agree with all of that. Like, I'd say, Beacon Hill is a part of the beaches. I'd say Lambie Heights, Killarney Heights. Well, Killarney Heights actually technically has a beach. So, that's something you could probably argue as well. And look, Seaforth obviously has beaches, so does Clontarf, but it's not really on Pittwater Road. So you could argue that too. But anyway, look, Northern Beaches Council region anyway. Funny enough, the suburb I've actually picked is on Pittwater Road. So for those people that are traditionalists of the beaches, it is actually a part of your Northern Beaches area, and that suburb is DY. Look, DY's got quite a bad rep along a lot of Northern Beaches locals as well. So you'll hear a lot of people that have been there for 20 and 30 years say it's the Bronx or it's the ghetto of the Northern Beaches. And the reason they say that is because, look, DY and particularly Narrowena, so Narrowena's a suburb just out the back of DY, are known to have a fair bit of public housing. Now, look, a lot of DY's public housing has been sold off. Almost all of Narrowena's has been sold off. So if you were to Google something along the lines of Narrowena public housing sold off, you'll notice I think it was about 15 to 20 was sold off alone in 2019 from memory. A lot of them have now been redeveloped and sold for $2 and $3 million. So just consider that too. But look, DY is quite a cheap suburb for where it is. Now, it's one of the few suburbs in the beaches, along with, I'd say, probably Manly and Queenscliff, and you could probably argue French's Forest as well, that have really good transport lines. Well, Brookvale too, but Brookvale's not really a residential suburb. But DY has very good transport to the CBD and very good to North Sydney and Chatswood. Like, really good. You've got obviously Warringah Road taking you towards Chatswood and the upper North Shore. And then you've also got, the Pittwater Road and Condamine Street taking down towards, and then obviously Sydney Road taking towards the CBD. So got really good access. Look, it's surrounded by really expensive suburbs as well. So look, North Kelco alone is above $4 million. It's incredible. And DY, believe it or not, is only around 2.5 to 2.7 million. Now, look, you can still pick up dwellings, believe it or not, in DY for literally $2 million almost flat, which is incredible because it's very well located in the beaches, like and exceptionally well connected to transport, the main transport lines of Sydney. It is one of the main transport suburbs in the beaches. Not only that too, but it's actually right next to all the jobs in the beaches. And it's also, I'd say, near the like the fairly well rated schools in the beaches. So look, in DY alone, you've got Pittwater House. It's literally just out the back of DY. You're not far from St Paul's. You're not far from the good transport lines to the Lower North Shore suburbs that have the schools that a lot of people like sending their kids to. For example, like Loretto and Kirribilli, like Shaw Grammar in Northbridge as well. So you've got schools near there alone. And you've also got Collaroy, which actually is further north with worse should I say, transport lines than DY that is actually about $600,000 more expensive. Now, Coleroy, don't get me wrong, that price is completely, should I say, surrounded, or should I say, higher because of obviously Coleroy Basin and also the dwellings up on the actual hill of Coleroy, or should I say towards Coleroy Plateau with really good ocean views. But DY actually has that as well, up towards the, should I say, Narrowena side, and definitely towards the North Kirkhill side. Now, places are more expensive there, but they're very cheap in comparison to neighbouring suburbs. So look, for Beaches locals, I've given you a true Northern Beaches suburb. You might think a bit of it as a derelict suburb, but it is a very good suburb to buy in if you have about $2.5 million or so and you want to get into a good beaches market. So look, ignore the 20 and 30 year rhetoric that everyone has. It's a fantastic suburb, really good lifestyle, easy for work, easy to send your kids to school. So consider DY in the Northern Beaches. Look, an area I also really like is the Sutherland Shire. And I went to school here. Look, I went to Endeavour Sports High School, so shout out to anyone who lives down that way or went to school with me. I hope you're watching and I hope it's of value to you. But, you know, the suburb that I'm actually going to pick in the Sutherland Shire is Caringbah. And funny enough, Endeavour Sports High is actually located in Caringbah, so I promise you there's no bias there. It's just simply I've picked a suburb because it is a very good value and it is very well located. So, look, Caringbah, in my view, the interesting thing about it is it's actually the cheapest suburb in Sydney on a transport line within 10 minutes of a beach. Now, that is incredible. You can pick up places in Caringbah. I think the median price is around 1.75 million, but you can pick them right down, $1.5 million, which is just insane, like incredibly cheap for Sydney. And like a really, really good suburb. The council is actually planning to redevelop Caringbah, not into probably like something like Miranda, but probably something a little bit more like Cronulla, where you have a few more high rises and a bit more amenities in town. So that's going to happen. You've got some really good, pubs in Caringbah. You're very close to Miranda, the main, shopping centre of the Shire. You're quite close to Cronulla as well, as I said, within 10 minutes of the beach. In most cases, 5 if the traffic's good. A lot of locals will know what I'm talking about. There's been a lot of development, particularly along Captain Cook Drive in recent years. There used to be no traffic lights. Now there's about 6 along that drive alone. So it's quite a good suburb, number one, especially towards the southern side of the station and south of the Kingsway. It's obviously towards Caringbah South, but the Caringbah South is very expensive. Caringbah is a lot cheaper than Caringbah South. But look, exceptionally located. You have also the Shire Express trains that literally are all stations to Sutherland, then only stop at Hurstville, Walleye Creek, Redfern, and then the CBD, and straight into the Sydney CBD. So really good transport lines in Caringbah, especially if you're close to that station. Really good place to purchase. Consider it also for lifestyle. Good family suburb too. Large blocks. A lot of duplexes even being built there too. So for a developer, probably a fairly good suburb to buy in as well. But my pick for the Sutherland Shire is definitely Caringbah. Let's just close out with an area that I think a lot of people do ignore in the Bayside of Sydney. So look, a lot of people argue that this suburb alone is either you count it in the Sydney inner south or maybe the Sydney inner southwest. And look, depending on who you talk to will depend on where they say it is. But the suburb I'm actually picking, I'm calling it the Bayside region because it is within that sort of council region, is Arncliffe. Now, a lot of people and even some of my friends in the past have actually lived here, and it does have a bit of a reputation for when, a lot of the first, I'd say, Middle Eastern, particularly Lebanese immigrants came there. There were a few social problems. That's in the early 2000s, no doubt. But look, that community has actually really contributed to, the development of the suburb. And, it's right next to Walleye Creek too, which is, for those that don't know Walleye Creek, it's basically your airport link suburb, especially on the train line. It used to actually be full of just industrial warehouses and tiny little kind of miners' cottages and, attached terrace dwellings, but now it's just all high-rise apartments area. It looks like kind of somewhere in Shanghai or something like that. Really good Korean and Chinese restaurants there, mind you, not having a go at it at all. But Arncliffe is basically on the cusp of Walleye Creek. It's mostly detached homes. They're mostly brick veneer as well. And it's actually got some really nice quiet pockets. So you've actually got a synthetic park that a lot of our locals will kick around, football, soccer, cricket, all those sorts of activities that people simply just jump the fence, which you're welcome obviously do. Really well maintained little park there. Really good village, like a lot of good authentic restaurants very close to there, obviously Walleye Creek as well. Particularly also towards Bardwell Park and Bardwell Valley of Arncliffe and Chirella. There's some really beautiful, dwellings in really quiet, tranquil streets down there. Not a lot of people would consider Arncliffe like that, but there definitely is. So consider that, and look, in Arncliffe alone, there's so much money being put towards community development. So, the government alone is contributing, it's like nearly a $250 million alone to the suburb just for development. Look, especially towards the tranquil parts not far from the station, you're going to see, parts of Arncliffe, sell for $2.5 and $3 million in probably the next 5 to 10 years. And you can still pick up places in Arncliffe for around 1.4 to 1.6 million. So, really good suburb to consider going on into the future, especially for those that love the St. George area and are kind of locals to that area. I've got a lot of, Greek and Italian friends that live in that area. So, consider it. Good area to buy in. Obviously, don't think of the past rhetoric, but consider what it's going to be worth in the future. Anyway, that comes to the end of this video. I'm going to get into further cities such as Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, and I'm also going to release a video soon asking questions that you should ask a buyer's agent. Now, I obviously am one, but I'm going to tell you what to ask to show and distinguish the boys from the men. So just think about that and just watch the video, because it'll be very interesting, because you'll be able to eliminate nearly, I'd say 99.9% of buyer's agents almost immediately, because most of them, in my eyes, are just absolute trash. But anyway, that comes to the end of the video. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, and if you're looking for a buyer's agent in Australia's best performing suburbs, be sure to reach out via www.compoundinvest.com.au. Thanks again, and welcome to the channel. I'll see you on the next one.